Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Maybe some of you already know that during this whole month of April, I will be talking about some of the greatest classic adventure movies ever made. And why, you may ask? Because this month of April, specifically on April 17th, which also coincides with William Holden's birthday, by the way, my grandmother would have turned 100 years old, and since she's in many ways the one who originated in my family the passion for classic movies, I wanted to do something special, and one of her favorite genres involved adventure movies. She really connected with movies that talked about the camaraderie, that talked about friendship, that talked about honor, groups of people helping one another. Those were the kind of things that you would find in genres again like adventure movies or Western, for instance. I bet she would have loved to have experienced some of these adventures, but in any case, she enjoyed all these movies that I will be talking about during this month of April. So with no more ado, let's talk first a little bit about the genre, and then we'll discuss the movie that will open this series, which is Beau Geste, released in 1939 and directed by William Wellman.
Stay here and die like rats in a trap, do you? No!
As many of you would know too, the adventure genre has one very emblematic figure in Douglas Fairbanks. He was the one that during the silent era really made some of the most amazing examples of the genre, and he was truly a pioneer, not only as an actor but also as a producer with films like The Thief of Baghdad or Robin Hood. But in this video and also the following ones, I will be focusing mainly on movies released during the 30s, beginning of the 40s, and that's because those were the films that my grandmother got to watch and got to love. Also, it is truly in the 1930s that this genre got to explode. In the Great Depression era, comedies and adventure movies really provided for much needed escapism. New genres emerged during this period, such as again screwball comedies. But while again this genre reigned, also polls of the time showed that the public also had a particular preference for any type of story that would be said in the wild and in foreign locations. Great filmmakers of the day, such as William Wellman or Henry Hathaway for Paramount, Michael Curtiz or Raoul Walsh for Warner Brothers, or Victor Fleming, Tay Garnett, or Woody Van Dyke for MGM, they all directed some of the best examples of the genre and were probably again also, along with John Ford, some of my grandmother's favorite directors. As I was saying too, the adventure genre also is a genre full of surprises, a melting pot of different elements which prompted again an immensity of subgenres and crossovers such as science fiction / adventure, war movies / adventure movies, fantasy / adventure, and even comedy / adventure movies. And also these movies normally are nothing short of visually astounding, as some incorporated technical advanced visual effects for the time with some innovative cinematographers that we'll also discuss during this month of April. And to start again with the series, I thought that the first movie I would like to talk about is Beau Geste. Again, a movie that has all these ingredients that again my grandmother loved, especially in terms of the plot, this camaraderie, friendship, brotherhood, all of those ingredients you can find in a story like Beau Geste, and also because it stars one of her favorite actors, Mr. Gary Cooper, who certainly became the face for some of the most famous movies of the genre. We'll obviously discuss during this month other famous faces of the genre, but today, to start off, Gary Cooper was again one of her favorites, and also this particular movie, based on a novel by P.C. Wren, was also one of her favorites. I must start by saying that this movie is a remake of a previous movie adaptation released in 1926 with an impressive cast, I must say, with Ronald Colman as Beau Geste, but also Noah Beery, Victor McLaglen, or William Powell. This is a very good adaptation, and I must say also that this second adaptation owes a lot to that previous film. Not in vain, it was also shot in the same location and using some of the settings that were used in 1926. So even though I will be talking about 1939's adaptation, there's a lot to be said about 1926, Ronald Colman's Beau Geste, who by the way was supposed to play the character again in this version, but he was previously attached to another project, so it went on to Gary Cooper in this case, who had in turn appeared in 1928's Beau Sobrere, which is the sequel to Beau Geste. The series also has a third novel that is called Beau Ideal. Beau Geste translates in English as gallant gesture or beautiful gesture, but also sounds a bit like jest in English, so there's been quite a bit of parody there, but that's something I'll talk about later on. In terms of the plot, it tells the adventures of three English brothers who enlist separately in the French Pouring Legion following the theft of a valuable jewel called the Blue Water, a fantastic name for a jewel. The three brothers are orphans who were raised by their aunt, Lady Patricia, to whom they are in great debt, obviously, and that's something that also has an impact on the story as well. The story is, I find, a tale in many instances of courage against all logic and gallantry at all costs, which are themes that I think were popular during those days. If you see the movie nowadays, this approach and this kind of behavior is pretty much dated and it feels a bit drastic, but I think also again it describes a certain moment in time when this kind of gestures were important because of, again, the context, the historical context, having experienced World War I, and that's pretty much the premise of this whole story. But I'll let you know also that the movie starts with a bang, as we find a small garrison approaching an isolated fort in the middle of the desert. So there's an element of mystery at the beginning of the movie, which is resolved as we move on from that moment to a large flashback in which we see the three Geste brothers when they were little. You will notice how one of the kids' faces is particularly familiar. You'll see a young Donald O'Connor playing the part of Beau Geste when he was little, and he's the most adorable. He has the same face that he has later on when he plays Cosmo Brown in Singing in the Rain, and it's one, I'd say, of the happy surprises of the movie, which has many in terms of the cast, because we also have Robert Preston. I adore Robert Preston. We have also Ray Milland, who is gorgeous and fantastic, but we also have Broderick Crawford and Susan Hayworth in her first credited role in movies. It is a top-notch movie on par with other fantastic classics of the genre also released in 1939. Terrific movies like Gunga Din or The Four Feathers. I know that the interest for this movie has practically faded, but again, I have to make a case for this film, not only because it has gorgeous Ray Milland, but also because it has one of the most vicious, amazing villains I've seen in an adventure movie. And I'm talking about Brian Donlevy as Sergeant Markov, who is absolutely sadistic. His performance in Beau Geste earned him his only Oscar nomination, and I must tell you that it's totally deserved, because he truly gets, I think, in my opinion, to steal the limelight from Gary Cooper and in some instances from Ray Milland with this character, and I think it's his performance and that part of the story the one that stands out the most. My favorite part of the movie is precisely the second half, in which the whole conflict and these interactions between Sergeant Markov and the Geste brothers are more present, and also with the siege of the Tuaregs to the fort, which I think is truly masterfully directed. At the forefront of this movie was a director that again was one of my grandmother's favorite and that I also greatly admire, and I'm talking about William Wellman, who was famous quite rightly for his action movies and also the way he presented, I think, the darkest side of humans in many of these movies. So again, quite a fascinating director that I think should be discussed a lot more. His work was fundamental in movies such as Wings, the first movie to receive an Academy Award, Night Nurse, The Public Enemy, A Star is Born, movies like Nothing Sacred, The Oxbow Incident, Westward the Women, and I could go on and on. Photography in this case was by Theodor Sparkuhl and Archie Stout. German cinematographer Sparkuhl had quite a terrific and international career, and he's quite famous for his distinctive low-key photography, which we can find in Beau Geste, but also in a genre that you know we adore in this channel, film noir, with movies like The Glass Key. So as you can see, quite an amazing group of people and lots more that contributed to Beau Geste. All this accompanied by a fantastic score by Alfred Newman. Beau Geste has seen since 1926 and 1939 also other adaptations, and it has been spoofed many times, most famously in a movie called The Last Remake of Beau Geste, released in 1977 and directed by Marty Feldman, who many of you may be familiar with if you have seen the terrific Mel Brooks movie Young Frankenstein with Gene Wilder, one of my favorite comedies of all time. And in a very Mel Brooksy style, he spoofed adventure movies and particularly the story of Beau Geste. But again, a part of this spoofs and also other remakes of the story, as I was saying before, Beau Geste has fallen on the wayside despite again the presence of Gary Cooper and Ray Milland, and it is a shame, I think, not only because again my grandmother loved it, but because it is a terrific adventure. So if you haven't yet watched Beau Geste, released in 1939 but also Ronald Colman's version of 1926, I really highly encourage you to do so. Alright, so that's all for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed this first episode of the April Adventure series, again brought to you courtesy of my grandmother. Let me know in the comments down below if you have seen Beau Geste and which classic adventure movies are your favorite. And as always, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, stay safe, take care, and see you all very soon for another video. Bye! Blue water. When I think of blue water, I think of a perfume. Blue water. Blue water. Le nouveau parfum.